Hello and welcome to my 2 cent. It's Runday, and as always, I'm going to be ranting and raving before I actually go do my 2 mile run. My 2 hour run today is going to be a little different because I'm doing a 61-20 run. Um, let's see. Let's log into the stream. Pause it, and then I want to. I really don't know. I'm kind of tired. I've been really exhausted all weekend. I haven't really been motivated to do much. I'm really not even in the mood to record, but I want to try to make this a continuous thing and try to be as consistent with it as possible. I'm looking for. I probably won't be able to find it, which is let's see if it's just in my feed. It's probably on my phone for sure. Um, Creation versus atheist groove. Um, I think it's just searching all of you. Yeah, he did. He was wilding. Welcome to the stream. I'm looking for this question. Why is evolution? Here it is. Well, this isn't. Why is evolution a true scientific fact and creationism isn't? I was trying to find the framing of that question. Is evolution a fact or a postulate? I seen a question and I wanted to address it, but I can't remember how it was worded. I guess I'll just go off the top of my head since I can't find the exact question. So, I use my computer, my laptop, to read the comments on my phone, so I can record and respond to you guys. So, how do I begin this? Okay, so there is the creation mythology. I don't have a Bible. I probably should go buy one. There's a creation mythology which explains how God created the heavens and the earth and goes into all of the different stages and steps. And then there's evolution theory. Evolution theory is based on the evidence of the world. And I think a lot of people get confused about what evolution theory implies. Evolution theory is not just some ideas that a bunch of scientists sat down and came up with. They're not based on beliefs. They're based on the observations of nature, right? What is the best evidence in nature for evolution theory that all life forms evolved from other life forms? The idea that so you have the idea of a species, right? And the most important component of the idea of a species, my door is open, so the most important component of a species is that it can breed with another member of its kind and produce a fertile offspring, right? So when you understand that, then you ask, the question that you ask is, well, if dogs and dogs can breed together and produce more dogs, and cats can breed together and produce more cats, and fish can breed together and produce more fish, and turtles can breed together and produce more turtles, then where did those animals, what is the origin of those animals? Because I think when it comes to creationism and evolution, they both are trying to answer the same question that's a byproduct of the way that the mind perceives reality. We look into the world and we see all of this stuff, and children reach a certain point of awareness where they realize that the way that I see others is the way that others see me, right? So we call it self-awareness. You become aware of the fact that you exist and that the things around you exist. Religion tends to equate this with God to justify one's existence. It's very hard for young people to wrap their adolescent mind around the idea that I exist because I exist, and there's a possibility that I could not exist. And that threshold of I exist and I cannot exist, what does it mean to not exist, is the foundation that the idea of an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving creator was invented from. It kind of feels that existential dread that comes from this higher level reasoning at a very young age, without the mental capacity to understand it. I think the biggest miscommunication in the world when it comes to young people, because of the way society is structured, is a lack of communicating to the youth that their minds are not fully developed. Children are not broken, they're not mentally challenged or inferior humans, but the capacity of the mind when you're young, every adult remembers what it was like to be a child, and every child struggles with understanding what an adult says when he says that you're just a kid. But every child has a neurological limitation on what they can process at the highest level of what it is to be an adult. That's not to say that the information is different. It's the way that the mind quantifies the information, right? When you hold a ball in front of a child, the child generates a adolescent type of response from seeing a ball. When you hold a ball in front of an adult, the adult generates an adult-like response from the ball. The child and the adult see the same object, understand the same information, have the exact same quantifiable reasoning and capacity to reconcile what it is a ball is, but the influence of the adolescent mind to be more immature versus the adult mind to be more mature is not something that is formatted in a way that is really easily to communicate, because you can't. I bet a good example is my cousin Xavier. When I was in my 20s and he was still like 9 or 10, and he was like, Mr. P, always I'm not mature. I'm mature. And he was like running around, bouncing around like a kid. And I'm like, you're not mature. I'm like, man, you're not mature. Like, you're just not. He's like, yes, I am. He's like, but you're not. He's like, but I am. I was like, are you sure you're mature? He's like, yeah, I'm mature. I'm confident I'm mature. I was like, are you absolutely sure? He's like, yes, I'm absolutely sure. I said, okay. I looked at him. And I said, but. And just by saying the word, he erupted in like deadly laughter. Like it was the funniest thing he had ever heard ever in his entire life. And it reinforced the whole point that I was making about him not being as mature. Now he's an adult. He doesn't, that won't work anymore. You know, it's in that space that we grapple with these ideas of evolution and creationism. What I think happens when it comes to the child learning about Christianity versus learning about science is that we associate the discomfort and the fear of not being able to conceptualize things outside of the capacity of the adolescent mind. We find some level of peace, or even if we don't find some level of peace, we find some level of acceptance of that existential dread with the association of God, right? So every time a child doesn't understand something, they insert God into that void. And over the years of doing it, once you become an adult and your mind becomes fully formed, you don't really have the limitation to not understand that thing anymore, but you have an association with that thing with God. And at every stage of our development from child to adult, we transcend that adolescence into a more mature state, and we build our postulates and our axioms on top of each other as we get older and older and older and older. Unfortunately, religion limits how much information you're allowed to have when you're growing up. So a lot of the voids that should be filled with knowledge are filled with God. So people that follow religion tend to have a lot of answers that just equate to God. They have a lot of experiences that just equate to God, and they build on top of those experiences every year in their life. So then by the time they get to 20, 30, and 35 and 40, those emotional experiences and those values just equal God. And they just get comfortable with that. They just get comfortable with, when I turn on the faucet, water flows because of God. Cars drive down the street because of God. The sun rises every day because of God. The trees change their color every season because of God. They don't need the deeper understanding or deeper reasoning. And every time you present them with a deeper understanding or deeper reasoning, it challenges the adolescent energy at the adult mindset, right? The adult mind is able to argue the point of what the child felt. And so those two interactions cause what we see on the internet. A bunch of people arguing the point about things that can just be that are not that complicated. It's not that difficult. It's not. If I say, God, open the door, come inside and sit on a couch, God will not open the door, come inside and sit on a couch. It will not do that. So me being a physical entity, as a person that doesn't believe in God, I'm not an atheist, but as a person that doesn't believe in God, slash those people that define themselves as atheists, when they say, I don't believe in God because God doesn't exist, that's what they're talking about. Like, God still has not come into the. I did the same thing several weeks ago, and no matter how much you pray out and ask for the evidence of this entity to become a physical manifestation for you, it never shows up, right? It doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. It just means that the physical existence of a God is not quantified by the presence of a physical God. There's nothing to argue about. There's no reason for atheists to have to constantly argue the point with a Christian about the fact that God will not pull up a chair and sit down with you and have a conversation with you directly where someone else can see and hear the conversation the way that when you're getting lectured by your mother and father, you can hear both of their voices and you can watch them interact with each other, talking to each other while you're getting scalded or while you're being taught something of value, right? But the idea of all of that conflicts with the internal emotional state that is more real to individuals than the external world that is indirectly received through the mind, right? So that's the foundation that creationism is built on, this internal understanding of this intimacy that self has with self about how self feels about values, right? If I say flower or potato or chip or yesterday or November, those words create certain values and responses that are internalized by everybody differently. And when you're trying to communicate with somebody, those words that are used are going to be received a certain way by different people. Even though you're using the same words and the same accents and the same postulates and the same theorems, they're going to all be intercepted and interpreted differently by the people receiving them. And when you are a person of faith, those words have to be filtered through a conditioning that is built on religion, which is a belief-based conditioning. You have to believe. The foundation of religions is always fault and failure and wrong as proof of evidence to assert someone else's right to tell you what you should and shouldn't do, and why you should be listening to somebody else and obeying what somebody else says instead of listening to your own self-agency, right? On the other side, science doesn't care about none of that. Science just wants you to understand that this is a tree, this is a rock, this is a glass, this is a potato chip. So that when you have the proper understanding of these things, now we can have a conversation where we can communicate actual information with each other. I call it being a functional adult and what's the word I use? Effective communication. I cannot effectively communicate with you if you don't understand what I'm saying. If you don't have a understanding of what plasma is, I can't communicate with you. If I say, go get me some plasma, are you going to your refrigerator, or are you going to get into the rocket ship and go into space? Like, which direction are you going to go in? I can't effectively communicate. So you have to have proper axioms, proper postulates, proper reasoning and understanding. And when we go into the conversation about evolution, it breaks down semantically because you can argue the point instead of focusing on the actual values, right? The reason why science says the universe began with a big bang is because the evidence of an expanding universe is present everywhere. And a lot of the main reason why scientific evidence is so credible a lot of times is because most of the things that scientists discovered was discovered by accident. And a lot of Christians be like, yeah, it was discovered by accident because they don't know what they're talking about. It's like, no, they had an idea, they had a premise, and they wanted to test that premise. And in the process of setting up this particular test, they created a bunch of empirical questions that needed to be answered because of that test, right? A lot of the names and stuff I'm gonna probably get wrong because I don't spend a lot of time doing a lot of research and doing all the stuff I should be doing. But I believe it was Hubble. He built a radio telescope, not that big, fairly small for radio telescopes. But this was before all this existed. We didn't have TVs, we didn't have radios, we didn't have cell phones. Before all of this stuff existed, he built a radio telescope. The electromagnetic spectrum was fairly new. There was a lot of uncertainty about it, and he wanted to calibrate his signal. He needed to calibrate the signal so that he could detect something. I think if I'm not mistaken, they built a telescope to verify that they could broadcast a signal and then actually receive the signal. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but I think that's what they were trying to do. So he built this telescope so he could detect the signal. And he detected the signal, but it was weird because it was like there was this other weird signal that was interfering with his signal, and he couldn't understand where it was coming from. So he was like, I wonder where the radio tower that's transmitting this other signal that's interfering with the signal I'm trying to detect is coming from, right? So he started rotating his telescope around to try to pinpoint exactly where this other interference signal was coming from. I think by this time they did have radio. And so he's like rotating this thing around and trying to find it, and he discovered that the signal was coming from everywhere. The signal he was detecting with his telescope was coming from every single direction. And he was like, well, there's nothing on Earth that is man-made that can output a signal that can come from every direction. So if there's a signal coming from every direction, it has to be something in nature that's causing it. What in nature could be generating a signal that could be detected by every direction everywhere? And that's how we got the Hubble background radiation map. That was the foundation of how they discovered that there was a radiation signature that exactly was the exact signature blueprint of the Big Bang, right? When he realized that, so these signals are coming from everywhere. That means that there's signals coming from space that's passing through the earth that we can detect. We've always used light to look up into the heavens to try to make measurements of heaven, of earth, of the space and of the cosmos. But if the signal's coming from everywhere, then that means that we can literally just look at space using electromagnetic waves, right? So they started looking up into space using other instruments than optical satellites, and we know them. I mean, other than optical telescopes, because I think this was before. It had to be before they went to the moon. So he looked. He said, okay, so since we don't have to use optical telescopes anymore, we can just use radio telescopes. So he started using radio signals to actually look at and observe the the universe, right? And that's how they got the background, the microwave background radiation, the cosmic background radiation, that map, the blue and red funny map. So when they was mapping the sky and looking at these signals and understanding everything, Hubble noticed something interesting when he combined that data with the optical data that they had when they had a visual data set, and now they had a radio data set, electromagnetic data set. When they combined the two together, he noticed something very interesting. He noticed that galaxies that were red and galaxies that were blue were actually a Doppler effect of motion, light motion. So when the way it's always described, and most of the things that I've watched about the science of this, is that when an ambulance or a police car goes by you and it has that high pitched sound as it's coming near you, and then it has that low pitched sound as it's moving away from you, that is called the Doppler effect. The sound that is being emitted by the siren is constant, but because the vehicle that is emitting the sound is moving, as it moves toward you, those waves kind of interfere with each other in a way that causes the sound to pitch in one direction. And then as the sound is moving away from you, those waves are interfering with each other in a way that causes the sound to pitch in a different direction. That phenomenon is the Doppler effect. So the Doppler effect is what is caused when an object is emitting a signal while also in motion. A constant signal being emitted by an object in motion is defined as a Doppler effect. A light moving will also emit a Doppler effect, but it will emit it at the speed of light. And we see it as red shifting. The light will shift from the red spectrum to the blue spectrum. The light coming from the source is constant, but as it moves at a certain scale, you see this as red and blue shifted light. So when they look into the night sky, some things are red shifted into the red spectrum, the ultraviolet and no, the infrared and red spectrum, and some things are shifted into the blue spectrum, which is the ultraviolet and blue light spectrum, right? Objects are moving away from us or they're moving toward us. I don't remember which color is which. I think red is away and blue is toward. But that's what they see. So when they look, they're like, okay, if everything's moving, something's moving away from us, something's moving toward us, then there's this motion. So that it'll show like what direction is the universe moving in. Is it moving like to the right or to the left or up or down? And then they calculate all the data and they did all the math and they determined that the universe is expanding. Everything is moving away from everything else. Everything is redshifted away from everything else. Everything's moving away from everything else. Local regions are moving relative to each other is blue shifted, and everything that is moving relatively away from everything else is red shifted. So when they saw that, it was like, so that means that the universe is expanding. If everything is moving away from everything else, then everything is expanding. So the logical conclusion is if everything is expanding in the present, then in the past everything must have been closer together, right? So that's how the Big Bang came into being as an actual theory. If everything is moving away from us in the present, then logic dictates that everything was closer in the past. And if everything was closer in the past and all matter is finite, then there must have been some point in the past when everything was all together at the same common center. And we define that as a singularity. The physics of the singularity breaks down because you cannot do math with infinities. Our mathematics does not allow for us to calculate infinities. So the way that the way that we structure mathematics, our rules that we use that we govern mathematics with, break down with singularities. I'm sorry, break down with infinities, and a singularity is an infinity, like zero. Zero is an infinity. That's why you can't multiply by zero, things like that. So that understanding is how we came up with the evolution of the cosmos. But it's a more unified understanding because us as humans, we do the same thing. We think like if I am my mom's and my dad's child, and then one day I'm gonna have children, and my children are gonna have me as their parent, then who are my parents, and whose parents are those parents, and whose parents are those parents, and if you do that enough, you get to the first parent. Who is the very first parent that humans evolved from? Who is the first mother and the first father of humanity? Christianity says is Adam and Eve. All religions have this idea of a first parent or a first generation of people. Religion always gives you that answer because it's important. That's the reason why in the Bible there are just pages and pages and pages and pages of lineages of people. And what those pages, excuse me, what those pages tell you is exactly how many people were alive, or at least estimated to be alive during the time the Bible was written, to give you all of the families and all of the houses of all of the different nations and tribes on the earth, right? But the answer to that question, who was the first mother and who was the first father, is the source of the idea of God. Once you ask the question, you beg the question, who was the first parent, then you get the answer of God. And that's pretty much how the creation and religion, the whole idea of God, in my opinion, is built on that foundation. Like somebody asked that question, and in the process of asking that question, that became the answer. So the religion component of that question is I've said this in a past post, but there's basically four answers to that question. The first answer is monotheism. There's only one God. Polytheism, there are many gods. Atheism, there are no gods. And the last is we are gods. The fourth one will be we are gods. There's either there is no God, there's only one God, there are many gods, or we are God. We are the gods are the only four categories that I could think of to answer that question. I lean more toward the universe is self-creating and therefore is God, but nature and natural order is not a conscious, willful action, but life as we know it emerged as self-aware, self-agent entities. Because you have to realize that, or at least I realize that when I see an ant, I don't see it as important or as intelligent or as competent as I am, right? So there has to be a condition where something greater than me can come to this planet and look at me and perceive me from its perspective as an ant. And it won't think anything about decimating or destroying our planet or wiping us out, or I like to write fiction, and I imagined Cthulhu. I'm It's kind of eccentric. I imagine Cthulhu or Cthulhu-like entities trying to observe humanity, and because the Eldritch horrors cause us, they create chaos and uncertainty and madness in us through through their physical presence. They're trying to understand us, and they can't see our humanity because all they ever see is us in a frantic, chaotic, disordered state. And they always wonder, how is it that these mad beings that are always in this state of anarchy and chaos and disorder, how do they create such ordered systems whenever they observed whenever I observe them, they are never ordered, yet they create ordered systems. How can it be that such chaotic entities could artificially or accidentally create so much order? And basically what I'm saying is that in this mythos that I want to write, the Eldritch being observes humans, and in the process of observing us, its presence causes us to collapse into insanity and anarchy. And in the state and when observing us in a state of anarchy, chaos and anarchy, it doesn't ever see the humanity in humans because it's indirectly seeing only us as these chaotic entities. The same way that from a distance, colonies of ants are very ordered and very much able to function in their nature. But as soon as they are disturbed by the presence of a human, they react violently to this overwhelming, overarching existential crisis, existential threat to their existence. Unlike us, ants seem to be able to have this ability to naturally move in unison with each other, but humanity doesn't tend to do that. We tend to fragment and destabilize into a less coherent, ordered structure. So in the story, that's what I was writing. But what it really is for me as a writer is a reflection of the uncertainty principle and the idea of the observer effect. That when you observe a thing, you change that thing by observation of it. And the Eldritch horror observing us from its state of being so much more grand to us, being tectonic in scale. When it observes us and is able to have that classic classical perception to a quantum state interaction with us, which causes us to break our symmetry into chaos from order. And that's kind of how and why I wanted to write that story that way. So yeah, I don't think this is going anywhere. This is kind of what I do. But yeah, the other side of the religion component is the evolution part is if you allow yourself as a person of faith to not listen to don't inherit the fear of other people. Don't let other people scare you into limiting who you are to not be able to just be a functional person. There's no need for you to inherit someone else's insecurities or someone else's fears and their unwillingness to understand and accept. There are just things that individuals just simply will not understand or comprehend. There's lots of stuff I don't watch sports. I don't get it. I understand the statistics and the probability of it, but the gambling component of watching sports and being emotionally invested in this person running down a field with a ball in his hand to score a touchdown, and somehow I indirectly feel validation from watching someone else do something. That doesn't click in me. But the flip side of that is I understand the mechanics and the dynamics and the physics and everything else about it. But that's not the part of the sports that is given in. They don't they don't give that as much energy as the other part. So it doesn't really resonate with me like on that level. Um, there is there is a lot of peace that comes with forming postulates that work together, understanding why water phases from solid, liquids, and gas, knowing why. I internally have enough understanding of physics and chemistry that it actually makes sense to me why water turns to ice and then floats on the surface. It makes sense. It actually, even with gravity, it makes sense why the shape and structure of water as a diatomic molecule with positive and negative poles, and having having the oxygen molecule be a little bit heavier and the hydrogen atoms being a little bit smaller and lighter, and their organization and ordering, and how they would align with each other to form these molecules and form this crystalline structure, and how that crystalline structure, even though it's the same exact water, somehow in a solid state becomes buoyant, makes sense to me because of my understanding of physics. And the reason why it makes sense to me is because of viscosity. Viscosity is the reason why ice is buoyant. In my head, like the viscosity of ice, the viscosity of, if you realize that water is in a chaotic state, right? It's all moving around like this, right? And then you realize that ice molecules form these lattices of oxygen molecules attaching to hydrogen molecules in this very ordered state. When you realize that, you understand that even though you can't see it and it doesn't make sense, and it's observable because you can actually do this by dropping ice in water, you understand that ice has an electromagnetic field, and ice, even though you can't see it, has a positive and a negative pole, because all of the molecules are going to align in the direction of the gravitational force, which is pulling them down. Gravity is always going to pull the oxygen molecule down, and that's always going to cause the hydrogen atoms to move up. And because of that, when ice freezes, it always polarizes itself in that manner. So whenever you see ice floating in the water, even though you can't see it, the orientation of it level with the water is showing you the directions that all of the hydrogen atoms are pointing, and all the directions that all the oxygen atoms are pointing. On average, that's probably not like a perfect analogy, but on average, it's going to show you that. These are the kind of things that you can know and understand. This is like when Christians be like, I have a personal belief. That's my personal understanding. It's not a belief, it's an understanding. I don't believe that this is correct. I have a lot of structured and ordered postulates and axioms structured in an algebraic equation that quantify to that observation and that understanding based on that reasoning. That's what differs from having a belief versus having an understanding. You can walk into a situation with no experience and no understanding or no information and engage in certain things with that situation, and you'll have to operate from your ignorance. But eventually, you will gain enough experience to where you'll be able to just do things because you know. That's experience. There's a difference between ignorance and experience, and having knowledge and not having knowledge. Religion, unfortunately, keeps you in this belief-based reality where you're not allowed to. If you learn something that contradicts what you believe and changes how you feel, then you reject the new knowledge. You don't grow, you don't learn, you don't evolve. You just stay stuck, that adolescent child that every time somebody says but, you start laughing. That's just how religion is structured. That's why I'm not a religious person. It doesn't make sense to me that the things that I learned when I was 6, 7, or 8, or 9 are the same things that I should be operating from when I'm an adult. It didn't make sense to me when I was a child. It doesn't make sense to me now I'm in my 40s. I don't understand why one book should be the answer to everything. You can't survive. If I gave you the Bible and put you in the forest, you couldn't survive with just the Bible. So how is it the basic instructions before leaving Earth? It doesn't even have information for basic human survival in it. There's no basic human survival information in the Bible. The Bible doesn't tell you how to live in the desert, how to live in the Arctic, how to live in a tundra, how to live in a wetland. It doesn't give you information on what animals are poisonous and which ones are not. It doesn't give you any of that information. It doesn't give you the basic things you need to be able to survive. It doesn't tell you anything about how to be a human. It just tells you how to be obedient to an authority. And it doesn't tell you how to be obedient to God. It tells you how to be obedient to an authority in general. The Bible teaches you how to be obedient. It doesn't even teach you um, how to be ordered and organized. It just tells you how to be obedient, how to be submissive, how to follow directions, and how to acknowledge that somebody has more authority and control than you do, and how to find your way into that structure. That's the role and the goal of the Bible. The Bible was designed to justify the European conquest of the world and put all Europeans in a higher position of authority over every other non-European, to always be in a position to dominate and administrate and control everyone else. And they say that they have the right to do so because of the monotheistic God in heaven, the Holy Trinity, and Jesus in the flesh. And that's pretty much the only function the Bible serves. And when you listen to people that follow religion argue their points online, that's all they're arguing about. They're just they're constantly in a state of arguing with you to justify and reinforce their own belief in God. And every time they engage with broken logic, they reassert their evidence from their own internalized reasoning system. They don't have a reason. They don't have a way to reason outside of themselves. They just reason within themselves, and they reinforce their own internal reasoning. I'm right because of this. I'm right because of that. This is true, so that's true. That's true, so this is true. And all of that is built. All that is backed up based on how they feel, and how they feel is the belief. How they feel is the belief. If you say trees, stars, potatoes, tomatoes, that's belief. You sit down and listen to a song, that's belief. How you feel is how you believe. Like, that's just the way that it unfortunately works, and it doesn't get you very far in life. That's why society is stagnated, because there's too many people that believe in a God that isn't doing anything to help us universally. God doesn't stop hurricanes. God doesn't stop earthquakes. God doesn't stop firestorms. God doesn't stop nothing. Nothing. If anything, God is apathetic and doesn't care. So it's much, much, much more efficient to love and to be of service than to put your faith that some imaginary entity is going to, some imaginary entity that you believe in and worship is going to protect you from somebody else that believes in that same entity and worships that same entity and prays to that same entity, and that somehow you are going to be favored more than the other person. That's just simply not a gamble that I'm willing to take. It's much easier for me to just know that you have no power and you have no authority based on what you say, and that I give you energy and I give you power and I give you authority by acknowledging your bullshit. And if I keep acknowledging your bullshit, and if I keep entertaining your bullshit, and if I keep humbling myself to your bullshit, it's only going to reinforce your belief in a God at the forsaking of me as a person that's physically in the room. You're waiting for God to walk into the room while ignoring all of the people around you every day that's walking in and out of rooms. And that's fine if that's what gives you comfort, but what is your end game goal? Christians are always the biggest the biggest bet that Christians always make is it's better to believe in Jesus so that I can have an eternal life. Because what if there is a God, and what if you don't believe in God and you're wrong? Well, my position is I believe, I actually know that the things that I do in this life carry more weight than my long-term everlasting life in the afterlife. And that it's better for me to just be a good person for the sake of being a good person than it is for me to pretend to be a good person just so I can get into heaven. Especially if you guys say that God knows in your heart. I don't believe in fucking God. So even if I try to pretend like I do, if God knows what's in my heart, God knows that I'm full of shit. So why should I waste my life pretending to be something that I'm not to a God that already knows everything, when it's easier just to be honest and kind and respectful? That to me that's just why I move the way that I move. So this rant was a rant, and hopefully something relevant or tangent came from it. But it's time to go run. So as always, my name is Paul Emerson, and I've given you my 2 cents.